Hey everyone, it's Kat, and I'm back today with another presentation. This one is called the Oera Linda Book, Comparing Translations. I felt it necessary to make this presentation because so many of you learned of the Oera Linda Book through Robert Sephir, Asha Logos, or Jan Ott, or read the OLB on your own and then went on YouTube to find videos on it and came upon their work and took it to be the truth. You have to remember that if the work is important to us, to help us in our awakening of who we truly are, something that can inspire us to be free, the Maggie will put people in place to be the leaders of this opposition. Of course, this is to control us so that we don't get to the truth. The warnings of the Berg matron shout down to us,
"Watch, watch, watch."
So let's take a brief look at Robert Sephir and Asha Logos before we look at Jan Ott's work.
Watch.
Robert Sephir. For starters, and what should be the biggest alarm bell, is that Robert Sephir is Jewish. Just do a quick Google search and you will see this fact. And by the time you get to the end of my presentation, you will see that the Jews are the Maggie of the OLB. They are the enemy of the Frians. So do we really think he would give us an accurate account of the OLB? Of course not. If we take a look at his last name, Sephir, we see that it is short for Sephirot, which are the emanations of the Kabbalistic tree of life. The Kabbalah is one of the Maggie teachings they use against us. And here we have Madonna's tattoo. She got recently a Sephirot tattoo. And here we have Madonna doing the one eye with her left eye showing. The sinister eye, the sinister path, with a downward triangle for 3 and an M on her finger for the other 3, making 33. Also, the triangle is in diamonds for 33, and she's doing the shh, keeping the secrets of the hidden hand. Madge is a Maggie, like Sephir. Sephir, Sephirot. And if we listen to his presentation on the OLB, we see that he incorrectly calls the Berg matrons priestesses, spinning it so we will think of them as pagan priestesses. Many people won't even read the OLB because they have this preconceived notion that the OLB is pagan. I have so many comments about that people go, "Oh, it's pagan." It is not. We know that Berg matrons were the keepers of the morals, the teachers of the children, the advice givers, not pagans, not priestesses, not middlewomen between Roalda and the people. There were 0 priestesses or priests in Fryan society. The Frians had a direct connection to Roalda, no middleman or middlewoman needed. And who are known as the middlemen? The same men who come between us and God, priests, the same men who come between us and money, bankers, the same men who come between us and merchandise, merchants. And who are the priests, bankers, and merchants? Who have always been the middlemen? The Jews, also known as the Maggie. Asha Logos.
Watch.
Then we have Asha Logos, who wows people with his soothing music and mesmerizing voice. What does he really tell us about the OLB? He talks in a roundabout way, using fancy words, explaining who the Frians were and what they did, but doesn't really tell us much of anything. His presentations on the OLB are the politically correct versions, like potatoes with no meat. And his name is somewhat sketchy as well. Asha means existence in Greek, and Logos is the name used by the Theosophists, the Luciferians, for their god, and is heavily used in Gnosticism. One of the most famous theosophists, Helena Blavatsky, used the term logos extensively in her writings. Blavatsky states in her book, Theosophical Articles and Notes, that when the term logos, the mystic divine voice of every nation and philosophy, comes to be better understood, then only will come the first glimmering of the dawn of the one universal religion. So Ashalogos would mean existence of the universal voice of the one world religion. Doesn't sound very pro-Frian to me. And here we have Helena Blavatsky, the Theosophist and Luciferian, pointing to her temple. Who else do we notice pointing to their temples? Oh yeah, the Masons. The temple is where the hidden knowledge is kept. Jan Ott.
Watch.
And Ashalogos wrote the foreword in Jan Ott's book, Codex Oera Linda. They always seem to partner up. Ott has a YouTube channel called Oera Linda. And if you look at his playlist, you can see that he recently was interviewed by Catherine Austin Fitts. In the interview, she asked Ott if the OLB could be a hoax. He didn't give a very convincing answer as to why it wasn't a hoax. Maggie and their cohorts would love for Frians to think the book is a hoax because they know how important the book really is. If you're not familiar with Fitz, she is a regular on The Alex Jones Show, a show which is a honeypot to catch the newly awakened. Remember, they control the opposition by leading it, with people like Alex Jones and Catherine Austin Fitts. And then we have this guy right here. Do you guys remember him? He was the one that made the movie Loose Change about 9/11. It was amazing how it was done and ready to go right after that event happened. Just like the Patriot Act was all written up and ready to go right after 9/11 as well. Kind of like it was all planned ahead of time. So Ott was on with Fitz, and before that he was a guest on Red Ice Radio, otherwise known as Fed Ice, which is another honeypot to attract the newly awakened so they can control what information they get. And then we have this interview of Ott, where the positioning of the book in front of the interviewer is very staged. He's seeing with his left eye, the left-hand path, the sinister path. And here, juxtaposed by 1984's Now. Strange placement? We know that George Orwell tried to warn us in his book titled 1984 about the New World Order. Remember the photo of Madge we just saw? We know there are a ton more people in Hollywood, in the media, in government, that show their allegiance this way, doing the one eye. That 1984 is now, with fake wars between Eurasia and Oceania, and then the next day between Oceania and East Asia. Just like the fake wars now between Russia and Ukraine. Why aren't the Ukrainians speaking up about it then? Because they get a free ticket to a Western nation with all the benefits. And just like the massive surveillance grid on us now, notice the V for victory are 22, and the man on the screen has the right side of his face in shadow, so he sees with his left. Tracking us with our phones through drones and cameras set up at every street corner and on every building. No more privacy, police state. William R. Sonbach.
Huzzah!
And although I don't trust Sefer, Ashalogos, or Ott's interpretations of the OLB, I do trust William R. Sonbach's translation. Alwyn J. Raubenheimer.
Huzzah!
And I do trust the work of Alwyn J. Raubenheimer, who also trusted William R. Sandbach's translation and used it in his book, Chronicles from Pre-Celtic Europe. It's too bad that Raubenheimer recently traveled to his watchstar. I would have loved to talk to him about his book and excellent research on the OLB. Alwyn J. Raubenheimer, author of Chronicles from Pre-Celtic Europe, died in 2017. Comparing the translations. So after reading both versions, Sandbach's in Raubenheimer's book and Ott's, I found some peculiar places where the translations differed and changed the meaning of the stories. I came to the conclusion that one translation is authentic and is passing down the true history of the Fryan race to warn their future brethren, while the other is a watered-down universalist book, taking out all the biblical connections and clouding the references of the very people that are the Frians' enemies to this day. These differences I want to share with you here. The photos of the book I will be showing you are from Raubenheimer's, but I do have Ott's and will be quoting from it. First, I wanted to mention that, for people saying that Raubenheimer would have approved of Ott's translation, here is proof that that is not the case. He was good with Sandbach's version and only slightly edited the translation. He writes, "Some editing was done where it was felt that Sandbach's translation does not reflect the original Friesian meaning. You will see that in the places that I take issue, Raubenheimer did not change the meaning from the original, while Ott did." The Maggie. One of the most important differences that I saw was how Ott changed Maggie, or Magyar, Maggie for short, from the original text, to Magus in his translation. By doing this, we lose the connection from the Maggie of the Oera Linda time to the Maggie of the present. The Maggie of the OLB is the same Maggie that is trying to wipe out Fryan and rule the world today. There is no reason to change the actual word in the OLB, Maggie, to a different spelling, unless someone wanted to hide their identity. There are lots of examples where Ott has done this. For example, the story of Woden and the Maggie on page 88 in Codex Oera Linda. He refers to the head Maggie as the Magus, and throughout the story. In Raubenheimer's text of the same story, you can see he uses either Maggie or Maggie, just a different spelling. Raubenheimer's version. Woden was strong, fierce, and warlike, but he was not clear-sighted. Therefore he was caught in their snares and crowned by the Maggie. Ott's version. Woden was strong, fierce, and heroic, but was not clear-sighted. Therefore he was caught in their trap and crowned by the Magus. And the original text.
Woden var sterk and vigantlik men hinas nafts klasjande. Tertruch vadi in jara mera fungen, en truchtene magi kronet.
Using the word Maggie is important because it was used from then up through the 19th century for these enemies of Fryan. Look at Arthur D. Gobineau's work, written in 1855, titled The Inequality of the Human Races, and you will see he uses the same terms, Maggie and Magyar. The first mention of Maggie in his book is on page 12 at the very bottom. Gobineau writes, "The Persian Empire at the time of its fall was wholly under the sway of the Maggie." Further in his book, he goes into who the Magyars, are. He says, "The Magyars are of Finnish origin and allied to the Laplanders, Samoyeds, Sami, and Eskimos. These are all people of low stature, with wide faces and prominent cheekbones, yellowish or dirty brown in color. The Magyars, however, are tall and well set up. Their limbs are long, supple, and vigorous. Their features are of marked beauty and resemble those of white nations. The Finns have always been weak, unintelligent, and oppressed. The Magyars take a high place among the conquerors of the world. They have enslaved others, but have never been slaves themselves. Thus, since the Magyars are Finns and are so different, physically and morally, from all the other branches of their primitive stock, they must have changed enormously. Then, in the second to last paragraph, he explains that the name Huns may denote a nation, but it is also, historically speaking, a collective word. The mass of tribes to which it refers is not homogeneous. Among the crowd of peoples enrolled under the banner of Attila's ancestors, certain bands, known as the White Huns, have always been distinguished. In these, the Germanic element predominated. And in the last paragraph, thus Magyars are white Huns, though they have been wrongly made out to be a yellow race, a confusion caused by their intermarriages in the past, whether voluntary or otherwise, with Mongolians. They are really, as we have shown, crossbreeds with a Germanic basis. So we can see from Gobineau's writings that the Maggie are a mixed race of Frya and Finda, Mongolian, and lived in the region of Finland. Gobineau states in error that they came from Finland. We know from the OLB and later historians that the Maggie traveled from the east and split up, a portion going up to Finland and a portion going down to the region of Hungary. And that the Finns weren't Maggie, but a Finda race, which we know as the Sami. Also, that they were crossed with a German race, our Fryan people, just like it says in the OLB, like when they tricked Woden to become their king and he had children with the Maggie's daughter, giving them his Fryan blood. Maggie is short for Magyar and Magyar. Sami is short for Samoyed. We can see here that Sami is also a Uralic language like Finnish. So the Sami are the Finda in the OLB that came with the Maggie to Finland. The Maggie spoke Finnish and the Samoyed spoke Sami. Mag-Rab, Magi, Rabbi. Like Gobineau, Raubenheimer makes some great connections with the Maggie as well. On page 250 of Raubenheimer's book, he writes, "We encounter the Maggie on various occasions in the Bible where it was translated from the Greek magos to wise men. In E.F. Murphy's Handbook for Spiritual Warfare, he gives the following definition. The Greek word is magos. It can be translated magician, sorcerer, wizard, enchanter, astrologer, or simply wise men. F. Bruce explains how the term was used in the ancient world. The Magi were originally a Median priest caste, but in later Greek and Roman times, the word was used more generally of practitioners of all sorts of magic or quackery." Raubenheimer continues, "From the Smith's Bible Dictionary gives a somewhat different explanation. The Magi took their places among the astrologers and stargazers and monthly prognosticators. It is with such men that we have to think of Daniel and his fellow exiles as associated. The office which Daniel accepted, Dan 5:11, was probably Rab, Mag, chief of the Magii. The word presented itself to the Greeks as connected with a foreign system of divination, and it soon became a byword for the worst form of impostor. This is the predominant meaning of the word as it appears in the New Testament. Acts 8:9, 13:8-3. In one memorable instance, however, the word retains its better meaning. In the Gospel of Matthew, the Magi appear as wise men, properly Magians, who were guided by a star from the east to Jerusalem, where they suddenly appeared in the days of Herod the Great, inquiring for the newborn king of the Jews. So we see that a chief mag is called a rab. A magi would be a rabbi, connecting the Maggie of Finland with the Maggie of the Bible. At the bottom of the next page, 251, Raubenheimer added, the Oera Linda Book showed that the Maggie and the Maggie RR in Scandinavia came from the East and that they practiced shamanism. Archaeological, genetic, and linguistic evidence points to their place of origin as the Altai Mountains, where Russia, China, Kazakhstan, and Mongolia meet. We have seen the similarities of these Magyars with the pagan priests and oracles in Greek mythology. In Hungary, their name lives on as the Magyar. In Phoenicia, we identified them as the Gola. Remember Golan Heights? Who gave rise to the Gauls and the Druids. They in turn influenced the Celts. The pagan priests in India were of Sino-Mongolian descent, and in empires of the Medes and the Persians they were known as the cultic Magi, with their perverse theology. The Greeks referred to them as Magos. In the New Strong's Dictionary of Hebrew and Greek Words, we find the following. Magos, of foreign origin, a Magian, i.e., an Oriental scientist. By implication, a magician, sorcerer, wise man. Isn't it interesting that these same Magi who migrated to Finland originated from the same area as the Khazarian Jews? Land of Magog, Maggie. But Raubenheimer doesn't stop there. He makes another major connection with the Bible and the land of Magog. He writes, we may realistically infer that the Magi in the Middle East and the Magi from Scandinavia, as well as some other shamanistic priests, originated from the Altai mountainous region in western Mongolia. This leads us to another interesting deduction. In the Bible, in Ezekiel 38:1-3, we find the following regarding the mysterious Gog of the land of Magog. Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of a man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshesh, and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Gog. And in Ezekiel 39:1-2 gives us a clue to the locality of the land of Magog. And you, son of man, prophesy against Gog, and say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Gog, and I will turn you around and lead you on, bringing you up from the far north, and bring you against the mountains of Israel. Raubenheimer concludes, biblical scholars have all along accepted that the name Gog means mountain. They thus deduce that this mountain must refer to the Caucasus Mountains to the north of Israel. Look how similar the words Magi, Magog, Magyar, Mongol are. You could tell they're from the same family. Magog versus Fryan. The most famous Mongol was Genghis Khan, who ruled from this region in the land of Magog. Genghis means great, and Khan means king. He proclaimed himself the great king or universal ruler, and Khan is a variation of Cohen, which is the Jewish priest class. The Cohen is the king of the Jews, and some speculate that the name Genghis is a variation of the name Jesus. King Jesus, Khan Genghis, Jesus, Genghis. So this would be a title given to a great ruler. Raubenheimer makes another good point here. Without the Oera Linda Book, it is unlikely that this reconstruction would have been possible. Hence, Gobineau didn't realize they went to Finland, not originating there, right? If he read the OLB, he'd see that he had the inverse, that they actually went there, not from there. History has shown other invasions from that part of the world, such as that of the brutal Genghis Khan from 1206 AD onwards. The subsequent Mongol Empire extended from the eastern shores of China right into Central Europe, arguably the largest land empire the world has ever seen. He continues, in researching this book, it became evident that the two groups of people in antiquity who had the most influence on Eurasian history were the shamanists from Central Asia and the Friesians from Western Europe. In DNA terminology, the R1A and R1B haplogroups. The R1A group appears to have brought a permissive paganism and conquest by either deceit or military means, whereas the R1B group from Western Europe brought monotheism, technology, and their fair share of conquest to the party. All other religions and civilizations were variants and compromises between these two groups. And it is a war to this day between Magog and Fryan, enemies from the very beginning. And how important is it to show this connection in translations of the OLB, which Raubenheimer clearly did, and Ott clearly did not. Ever wonder why Trump's motto was, "Make America Great Again"? MAGA is for the Maggie, his overlords. Now let's look at another important example. Cows with golden horns. We can see in Raubenheimer's version that it says, when the Maggie got sniff of this, he took the most attractive of his Finns and Magyar and promised them cows with golden horns, to let them be taken in, employed, by our people in order to spread his doctrines. In Ott's version, he changes the lines to read, when the Magus comprehended this, he selected the best looking of his Finns and Magyars and promised them mountains of gold if they could find acceptance among our people and then spread his doctrine. In the original text, this line reads,
Da dene Magi dat ander no kröt, da nahm das Genster Sinner, Fina and Magyara. Irlo Wanderer, Kü mit golden Horner, Sajara, trüch us Volk Vater Dedern. Afterdam, Sina leer ut breda.
Golden Horna, Ki, Ku, cow, is not berg, mountain. It's pretty obvious that means cows with golden horns. He does put a subnote at the bottom saying mountains of gold, literally cows with golden horns expression. But why do that? Why don't you just leave it like it said and then let everyone else figure out what that is? Cows with golden horns would have us once again associate the Maggie of Scandinavia with the Maggie of the Middle East, their Bible and their golden calf worship of Moloch. If we look to page 378 of Raubenheimer's book, we learn of the adventures of Minnow and his time on the island of Crete. This island was inhabited by Finda people, led by Maggie, just like in Scandinavia. When the people learned of freedom from Minnow, they were ready to rebel, and the Maggie priests had to appease them by making some concessions. They took this out on Minnow and tried to kill him by poisoning his food. He evaded them, though, when a Fryan ship sailed past and quickly hopped on board. These Maggie worshipped the cows with golden horns as well. Many ancient artifacts have been unearthed depicting these bulls. And in this picture of the bull, it says it's at the little palace at Gnosis, right? So what's Gnosis similar to? Gnosis, like the Gnostics, right? K-N-O-S-S-I-S, G-N-O-S-I-S, Gnosis. On page 184, Raubenheimer writes, in addition to the fact that they all seem to have been oligarchies with similarities in superstition, religion, and forms of worship, there are also references to cattle with golden horns. We read in the Oera Linda Book that the Maggie in Finland and Northern Europe promised each of his subjects a cow with golden horns if they would infiltrate Frisian society. In Homer's Odyssey, Ulysses made a special offering to the gods by having a heifer's horns gilded before the ceremony. Wall Street Bull Market. What do we see out in front of Wall Street, New York? The same cow with golden horns, still worshipped by the same Maggie. So don't you think Ott should have left the translation as is and not change it to mountains of gold? Unless someone wanted to hide their identity. Our earliest history. Now let's move on to the Fryan's creation story. You will notice it is about 3 races, no more. There are no mixed-raced Maggie present at this stage. So the only way they could learn of our creation story would have to be by word of mouth from Frians. This is not their beginning. It's our beginning, not theirs. They came later, much later. Now let's look at this sentence translated by Raubenheimer. This is our earliest history. Waralda, who alone is good and eternal, made the beginning. Then came time. Time wrought all things, also the earth. In Ott's version, the line reads, this is our primal history. Waralda, who alone is whole and eternal, created the potential. Time began and wrought all things, the very earth itself. And here is the original text.
Dat is usa forma sketnise. Vralda, dam alena God, and evgis. Makade tanfang. Dana came tid. Tid frochte alle tinga, ak irta.
So we can see that Raubenheimer stayed with Sambach's translation of the beginning, and Ott changed it to the potential. But if we look up the word Anfang, we see that it means beginning in English, in Dutch, in Western Frisian. Nowhere does it mean potential. Now, if we put in potential, we see it isn't beginning in Western Frisian. We see it isn't beginning in German. And we see it isn't beginning in Dutch. Notice it does not say beginning. So beginning and potential are not synonymous. They're not the same. You can't just interchange them. They're not the same. Now let's look at the original drawing of the 3 wheels from the OLB. On the first wheel, and going clockwise, it says Waralda. On the second wheel, it says T Anfang. On the third wheel, it says T Bijin. I do believe that the T in front of Anfang and the T in front of Bijin stands for tid, time. The original text again reads,
Dat is unser formasgetnese. Vralda, dam alena God, and evgis. Makade tanfang. Dana came tid. Tid frochte alle tinga, ak irta.
Notice the order of the words I bolded. We see from the text, Woralda, then Anfang, and then Tid. Tid would be Begin. So the three wheels depict Woralda, then the beginning, and then time. Time is when Woralda puts the beginning into motion. Tid is time and synonymous with Begin. And I'm sure I'm butchering that, and I'm sure you'll let me know, but I'm doing the best I can. Thank you. So why would ought change the word beginning to the word potential? Who uses the potential? The same Maggie priest that we have been discussing. Are you surprised? It is used in the Kabbalah, specifically in the Zohar, which is a section of the Talmud. And here we read their version of the beginning. Chakma means the potential of what is, and is an emanation, a sephirot, on the Kabbalah tree of life. Remember Robert's last name? Sephirot? A constant flux between being and non-being. So you can see that by inserting potential into the story of our earliest history, the Maggie are inserting themselves into it. Not only do they insert themselves into it, they usurp our story for themselves as well. Take a look at the Wheel of Fortune tarot card. You'll notice it is the same six-pointed wheel as the wheels in the OLB. And this one has text wrapping around it as well. The Hebrew letters are for Yahweh, and the Roman letters spell tarot, T-A-R-O, and then you go one more click to T, right? You get tarot clockwise and Torah going counterclockwise. If we start at the bottom going clockwise, also we can add a rota, R-O-T-A, which means circle or wheel. There's more to this image, but the main point I'm trying to make here is that you can see how the Maggie have copied from Fryan. This is the same thing they did with the stories in their Babel Bible, taking Fryan stories throughout their history and using them for their own stories. And remember how we mentioned the Theosophists, Luciferians? They also believe in the ultimate potential. It reads, for Luciferians, enlightenment is the ultimate goal. The basic Luciferian principles highlight truth and freedom of will, worshiping the inner self and one's ultimate potential. Now let's go further down page 351 in Raubenheimer's book, where we read, after the 12th Yule festival, she, Earth, gave birth to 3 maidens, Lida out of glowing, Finda out of hot, and Frya out of warm dust. When the last came, Woralda breathed his breath upon her, in order that men should be bound to him. When she was full grown, she took pleasure and delight in the visions of Woralda. Hatred entered them. They each bore 12 sons and 12 daughters, every Yule time, too. From this came all mankind. Now let's see how Ott translated these lines. He writes, after the 12th Yule feast, she bore 3 girls, Lida from glowing hot, Finda from hot, and Frya from warm substance. As they lay naked, Woralda fed them with his breath, so that mankind would be bound to him. As they matured, they became fruitful and dreamed of pleasure. they received Woralda's Odd into them. And so they each bore 12 sons and 12 daughters, twins each Yuletide. All of mankind came from these. And here is the original text from the OLB.
After it 12e jul, verste badehju, tra mangerta lyda, vart ut glande, finda vart ut heta, an fria vart ut varmes dov. Taja blad kemons biste vralda jam, met sina adama. Tiltju damaneska anhim, skulde bündenwese. Ringas jarib wären krajan ja fruchta, and nochta an der drama vraldas. Otra drabina, and an vebadon ek 12 sinna, an 12 togatera, ekjol, titwen. Darauf sind alle Maneska kämen.
I couldn't find odd in Afrikaans, Dutch, German, or West Frisian. But in English, we have odd, which would be the opposite of even. And later, Eva was too sacred to say, so they would say even for good. The opposite of even is odd. The opposite of good is bad. Therefore, odd would represent bad or hate coming into the world. Odd, trad, rabina. Sambach took it from the Latin, which means hatred, and so Raubenheimer kept Sambach's translation as hatred entered them. Now, if only Frya received the breath of Woralda's morals and laws within her heart, then it wouldn't be a leap that the other two were jealous and thus hatred entered them, right? So the hatred entered Lida and Finda because Frya got Woralda's breath, right? Wouldn't that make sense? We know that when Frians build civilizations in non-Fryan lands, like in Athens, for instance, the locals at first love the Frians, but then eventually hatred enters them, and they either killed all Frians or ran them out of their lands. Hatred entered them is exactly what happens. And it makes sense that this is a part of the earliest history because they are teaching their Fryan brethren that it is in Lida's and Finda's nature to hate Frians. It's in their nature to hate Frians. Remember, Lida is glowing and Finda is hot. Only Frya has a moderate temperament, warm dust. So this is a warning to Frians, a very important warning. If you go with Ott's interpretation, he has Woralda put the breath in all races equally and doesn't differentiate them, meaning he puts a universalist spin on the earliest history. It reminds me of Noah's Ark, right? A universalist story. Also, if we just look at the grammar, we see that Hja, HJA, is she. That is singular. So it couldn't be talking about all three getting Woralda's breath. The first, the second, and then the last. It is the last that gets his special breath. She took pleasure in his delight, not they took pleasure. So once again, he is still talking about Frya, the last. And if we look at Ott's translation once again, they receive Woralda's odd into them would imply that Woralda had sex with them. Yet if we look on page 226 of Ott's book, Codex Oera Linda, he translates this sentence by the Berg matron Ricca this way. Because they have borne children, they have themselves called mother, but they forget that Frya bore children without being with a man. So Ott is contradicting his translation. Woralda could not put his odd into the three original mothers, and at the same time, one of the mothers, Frya, bore children without being with a man. Raubenheimer's version makes much more sense. Eva in our hearts. Another reason why I believe the translation is Waralda breathed his spirit upon her, Freya, is because the OLB confirms this later in Minno's writings, where he says in Raubenheimer's translation, Waralda, or Allfather, Father of all, God, has given me many years, and I have traveled over many lands and seas, and after all I have seen, I am convinced that we alone were chosen by Allfather to have laws. Light as people cannot make laws, nor obey them. They are too stupid and uncivilized. Many of Finda's offspring are clever enough, but they are greedy, haughty, false, immoral, and bloodthirsty. We alone were chosen by Allfather to have laws. On the next page of Raubenheimer's book, we learn what exactly was put into Freya's heart. We read, "The word Eva is too sacred for common use. Therefore, men have learned to say even. Eva means that knowledge which is implanted in the breast of every man, in order that he may know what is right and wrong, and by which he is able to judge his own deeds and those of others." In Ott's version on page 61 of Codex Oera Linda, we read, "The word Ewa is too sacred for common use. Therefore, we have learned to say even. Ewa refers to the rules that are imprinted equally in the hearts of all people, in order that they may know what is right and what is wrong, and by which they are able to judge their own deeds and those of others." When I first read Raubenheimer's translation, I immediately thought of Eve from the Bible, and how Eve is good, and that the Bible takes this sacred name, makes Eve bad, and applies it to all women, saying they are the downfall of man. Taking something that is so sacred, so good, and making it the reverse. Talk about Maggie tricks. And so here we have Ott once again hiding this connection by changing the word to Ewa. Here are the lines in the original text so you can see for yourself. And just in case he pronounces it Ava, A-E-W-A, Ava, why would you change the spelling?
Dat word Eva is tofraen onbeanmene, sekato nomande. Derom het man us Evin Caesar leert. Eva, dat zeit setma, der bi alamaniska elig, an jara mod prensent. Tiltju ja muge veta wat jucht, and unjucht se. An wertrich ja weldig sent jara asne deda, antam von orum tobirjochtande.
Notice too, Ott's imprinted equally in the hearts of all people is more equalitarian than Raubenheimer's imprinted in the breast of every man. And I don't think that Minna was thinking of the other races here, but meant in the hearts of every Fryan. It reminds me of the writings of Thomas Jefferson and his term, "All men are created equal," that he wrote in the Declaration of Independence, as a rally cry for his fellow citizens against the King of England. William Gailey Simpson writes, "It referred to equality of rights as between two groups of Anglo-Saxons, and it could scarcely have occurred to Jefferson and his contemporaries that future generations would strain these words to refer to equality of innate capacity among different races." Jefferson's published writings prove that he believed the Negro to be grossly inferior to whites, both in their mentality and in their character. And I believe the same thought could have scarcely occurred to Minna when writing those lines in the OLB. He didn't realize he would have to explain himself, right? Because it was common knowledge back then when he met. Now let's look under Frya's text, which Raubenheimer translates as, "Though him only can I recognize as free who is neither a slave to another nor to his own passions." Ott translates the line as, "But only those can I consider as free whom is neither the slave of another nor of an addiction." The original text reads,
Dacht Herre alleen maar ik as vrij kanna, denn een slaaf is van een oder nie van zijn dochter.
Ott does mention in his footnote that addiction, sine tokta, can have various meanings, cognate thought, but was usually used as passions here. However, being passionate would not be negative, but he assumes passions to be positive, and that's not always true. Now, what is wrong with doing that is that you take away from what the text is trying to teach us. We just learned from the Fryan creation story regarding Lida in Raubenheimer's translation that of laws she knew nothing. Her actions were governed by her passions. So what is the text teaching us? To not be governed by our passions like Lida is. Addiction is a modern term, and when we think of it, we think of desiring something outside of ourselves. Passions are internal. They are something within ourselves, our nature, our character. This is what the text is teaching us, and this is the way Sandbach's translation reads, and this is how Raubenheimer left it in his book. Thoughts would be related to passions, internal, whereas addictions would be related to external things. In addition, we know too that Eva is exclusively in the hearts of Frians by the next paragraph in Raubenheimer's translation. There is also another meaning attached here too. Eva also means tranquil, smooth like water that has not been disturbed by a strong wind or something else. If the water is disturbed, it becomes troubled, uneven, but it also tends to become calm again. That is the nature, just as the inclination towards justice and freedom that exists in Frya's children. Where it is mentioned that Eva also means tranquil, smooth like water that has not been disturbed, this would align with warm dust, as what Frya was called. Remember, Lida was out of glowing and Finda was out of hot. These are temperaments. They're natures that are being described. Tranquil is a temperament like warm dust. It is not talking about glowing and hot, which would not be still. It is obvious that Eva is not in the hearts of all three, because the three have very different temperaments, and the OLB is trying to teach the Frians through this story to be wary of the other two. So no, it does not say as per Ott's version. Ewa refers to the rules that are imprinted equally upon the hearts of all people. It does not say that. Also, remember the word odd and how it is the opposite of even? Well, here we have troubled as uneven. Uneven would be odd. Once again proving that odd trod Rabina does mean hatred entered them. True light of illumination. Here we have an interesting omission by Ott. If we look at the conclusion of Frya's text, which are their most sacred laws, meant to keep the people safe and free, we read in Raubenheimer's version, "Its light shall always illuminate your intellect, and you shall always remain as free from foreign domination as the sweet river water from the salt water of the boundless sea." In Ott's translation, he writes, Its light will forever illuminate your mind, and you shall remain as free from domination as your sweet rivers are free from the salt of the endless sea. In the original text,
Dat luchtera. Skildan ev juvebrin, öklaja, and aje skilundan even fri, beleva van unfria Welt, as juvas veterinsdrama van dat sollte Veter, der Andelase See.
we see in Ott's version that the word foreign has been omitted. Why? Well, who is our biggest threat today? The Maggie, which is a foreign tribe that is living in our midst. A foreign tribe that is trying to take over the world. A foreign tribe destroying Frya today. In the original text, von unfreie Welt looks like from unfreie, non-Frya worlds. So non-Frya would be foreign. World is language. Conrad gives the Frians some good advice. In Raubenheimer's translation it reads, "Here is my advice. If you wish that you alone should inherit the earth, you must never allow any language but God's language to pass your lips, and take care that your own language remains free from outlandish sounds." He continues, "The language of the East Schoonlanders has been perverted by the vile Magyars, and the language of the followers of Kaltana, Celts, have been spoiled by the dirty Gauls." What were the languages that they spoke of back then? Finnish and French. Neither Finnish nor French are Germanic languages, yet are spoken by Frians. We can see how the vile Magyars, Maggie, have corrupted our language from way back then, and they are still doing it today. The dirty Gauls, that's also the Maggie, right? So it's Maggie and Maggie. They have a goal to enslave us, and that is exactly what is happening in the present. Our people tried to warn us with the writings of the OLB. Conrad continues, "If they learn God's language, then the words, to be free and to have justice, will come to them and glimmer and glow in their brains until it becomes a flame, and that flame will consume all bad rulers and hypocritical and dirty priests." Here are a few examples of how the Maggie are still corrupting our language with their spelling today. In songs, Gwen Stefani's Holla Back Girl. Now write holla back in reverse. We get Kabbalah. Sound it out, Kabbalah. Maybe she'll write a song called Taurus soon. Robert would be so proud. And more obvious ones, like this name for a sporting goods company called Cabela's. If we stress the first syllable instead of the second, like the common pronunciation, we get Cabela's. And notice cable in Cabela's. Just change the E and L around and you get cable, which is their Masonic noose worn on the initiate's neck. The cabal run the show. The cable, the cabal, the Kabbalah, right? The Kabbalah is their teachings used to control us, and the Masons are tools in their toolbox. A Mason, the most famous company, even carries that name, Amazon. Amazon is A Mason. And the owner, Jeff Bezos, is a Maggie. Are we surprised? We need to follow Conrad's advice and take care that our own language remains free from outlandish sounds. So let's briefly look at our Germanic languages and see how we can purify them. The languages are English, Icelandic, Faroese, Afrikaans, Frisian, Norwegian, Swedish, Danish, German, Dutch, and Luxembourgish. Notice if we look at the word for the feathered creatures that fly and sing beautiful songs, They all look similar except for English. Bird, Vogel, Fugel. We can see that bird is the odd word out. Bird is not the word. But do we have another word in English that means the same thing? Yes, of course. We have the word fowl. Fowl would be the proper Germanic name for the winged feathered creature, not bird. That's what we should use. So instead of using bird, whenever you want to say bird, say fowl. Here we see that bear is the correct word because it comes up very similar in all Germanic languages, right? Bear, Bjorn, bear. It's all pretty much the same. Cat is correct as well, although it would be nice to change out the C with a K. K is more often used in Germanic words. C with the Latin words. And you can even see here, they're all Ks except for the one in English, right? So just make it K-A-T like we see there in Afrikaans. That would be the correct way. Cow is correct since it is so similar to the other Germanic languages, but again, we should replace the C with a K, right? So cow, koa, ku, right? So cow is correct, except it should be K-O-W. We see dog is not correct, but again, we do have an alternative word that is Germanic that we could use, and that would be hound. So instead of saying dog, say hound, right? And then that fits with all the other languages that are Germanic. So I hope I've convinced you to at least be a bit more cautious when reading and watching things on the Oera Linda Book, and I hope it has inspired you to take another read of it, to really study it. I've read it probably a half dozen times already, and with every read I have more epiphanies. I hope you will have the same enlightenment. So ultimately, we should see that language does matter. Translations do matter. They change the purpose of the story. Remember, the Berg matrons at the beginning of this presentation warned us,
Watch, watch, watch.
We know that watch has a double meaning. It means to be wary, but it also infers time, like the hands on a watch, on a clock, right? So the Berg matrons are telling us that as Woralda's wheel is put into motion, we need to be wary as we go through time. That these are our life lessons, that our choices are put in motion on the wheel, and we are to learn from them.
Watch.
And a special thanks, as always, to my fellow Frians who give these presentations their attention and love, and to my dear Friends Scotland Sean, Danielle, and Manfred de Vries, who lent me their lovely voices. All the best.